Introducing Pinwheel, children's programming that's fit for children. 24 hours of day of programming 7 days a week that'll make them wonder, laugh, ponder, and think.
Nickelodeon, the source for my and many others' childhood nostalgia. Launched in 1997 by Warner Cable under its original title Pinwheel, Nick, or Pinwheel at the time, was the first cable network launched specifically for children. Interestingly enough, Nick was originally launched completely commercial-free and remained so until 1984 after being purchased by Viacom in 1986. The channel was rebranded into the channel that we all know and love today. Now, Nick had a ton of memorable shows during its golden era, most worthy of their own video, but today, as you can probably imagine, is about a lesser-known gem from Nick's vault, Nick Arcade, a show with a very unique premise compared to its other counterparts, whom all shared similar layout, but can it compare? Or does it belong lost and forgotten? Let's find out on today's episode of Behind the Thing. From 1984 up until 1996, Nick went through what many would refer to as its golden era, and during that time they released some of their most talked about and renowned programs. Some of them included a handful of game shows. Some of the more reputable ones you may remember include Double Dare, with the premise being putting families against each other in a trivia of contests and a variety of sometimes extremely odd games, which the show would call a
physical challenge.
Then there was Legends of the Hidden Temple, which would put 6 teams of 2 children against each other, and again relied on the children answering questions, only this time they were related to a history lesson taught to them by a giant talking stone head. And again, another variety of
physical challenge.
Then there was Guts, which consisted of a variety of heavily athletic-based games, culminating in a race up a giant artificial mountain known as the Aggro Crag, which as a kid seemed like one hell of a time. Then there was Nick Arcade.
Behind this door is the Video Zone, a place between our world and the video dimension. Waiting to challenge you for control of the Video Zone is one of the game wizards. Is it Murloc, Scorsha, or Mongo?
Premiering in 1992, with reruns airing up until 1997, the show ran for 2 seasons and a total of 87 episodes. The show was hosted by Philip Moore, and was the first time Moore would have hosting duties on a show. Moore would go on to have a spot as a panelist on the ever-popular Figure Out from 1997 up until 1999, and a bevy of other shows on the Nickelodeon roster as well. The show consisted of 2 initial segments. The round would begin with one of the players from each team competing head-to-head in one of several of the games that were specifically designed for the show. The other segment of the show was video game-based trivia and a somewhat confusing board game-ish concept, which included spaces that would trigger the video challenges, which would pit one of the players against each other in a real-world game on a real-world system that included the NES, the SNES, the Sega Genesis, and the TurboGrafx-16. There was also the Neo Geo as well. The other spaces would trigger instant win prizes or a small trivia challenge. The goal of the board segment was to move the player piece through 11 different areas of exploration, with the goal being to move the player to a randomly selected goal space. Sometimes though, due to time constraints, and perhaps maybe the board segment being a bit too complicated, the player piece would be instantly moved to the goal, and the final question would be asked, and the team buzzing in with the correct answer would receive the goal points. The show would culminate in its final segment, which would pit one of the players against one of the game's 3 wizards, one being Murloc, an evil wizard with powers of lightning and electricity. There was also Mongo, a large troll who had the ability to hurl large balls of energy, and then there was Scorchia, a sorceress who had the ability to control and use fire. The players would face off against the wizards in a specifically made virtual reality game made for the show, and the player would appear on the screen chroma keyed into the game using themselves rather than a controller to beat one of the wizards and save the player piece Mikey and his virtual world. No matter how the show ended, win or lose, the players would still keep all the prizes they accumulated during the game, although there was a larger grand prize that would be awarded if one of the players could complete the game successfully, so even if you lost, you wouldn't usually walk away empty-handed. Looking back on Nick Arcade, it was definitely a product of its time, and was probably the most 90s things that Nick ever produced. Since Nick launched their Splat segment back in 2011, many of their classics would again see reruns during the late nights on Nick's main channel. Nick Arcade, however, has been absent from both reruns and reboots, and I feel that might actually be for good reason. While Nick Arcade was a good game show for its time, I feel like it wouldn't really be successful if it were rebooted or even shown on reruns. It would be very difficult to translate today's audience, and I think I'm okay with that. Nick Arcade had a great run and gathered a huge cult audience during its time, many of whom still hold the show in high regard up until this day, and I feel like any sort of reboot would sort of taint the memory of the show, rather than add to it. If you've never seen the show before and you're a fan of all things 90s, you should definitely hunt yourself down a couple of episodes because it is by far one of the most 90s and entertaining game shows that Nick ever produced to date. Alright viewer, that is going to do it. I want to thank you for joining me on today's episode of Behind the Thing. If you like what you saw, please click the like button down below. If you'd like to see more, please hit the subscribe button. If you have an idea for a future episode, please leave it in the comments down below. And also, don't forget to follow my Twitter left in the description below. And as always, I hope you have a great day.
Goodbye.